غرباء 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 ولغير الله لا نحمي الجباه غرباء.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله من استنى بسنته ودعا بدعوته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, in today's lesson we will be discussing al-hadith al-mu'an'an, al-hadith al-mubham, I think also al-hadith al-ali and al-hadith al-nazil. And most of these that we will be discussing, except for al-mubhamu, the rest of them, they are mostly related to the chains. And sometimes we refer to them as mabahis that are related to lata'if al-isnad. And we will come to what that means very soon. But lata'if al-isnadiyah simply means some peculiar features about a particular chain of a hadith. So we'll start today with al-mu'an'an. I remember last time we read the abiyat or the bayt that's related to al-hadith al-mu'an'an, and we ran out of time, so we could not finish it. So the author, he says, mu'an'anun ka'an sa'idin an karam wa mubhamun ma fihi rawin lam yusam. A hadith is said to be mu'an'an when it contains when it contains an ana, basically. And to explain this, let me cite an example from Sahih Bukhari, hadith number 2442, where Imam al-Bukhari, he says, حدثنا يحيى بن بكير حدثنا الليث عن عقيل الليث ابن سعد عن عقيل أي ابن خالد عن ابن شهاب الزهري أن سالما أخبره أن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما أخبره أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قال المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلمه ولا يسلمه ومن كان في حاجة أخيه كان الله في حاجته. Now, if you look at this hadith, you would realize there was a part we started saying حدثنا يحيى بن بكير حدثنا الليث عن عقيل عن ابن شهاب. So all of this part of the hadith is called the sanad, and where he says أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال al-Muslimu akhul muslimi to the end is what is often referred to as the matn. So broadly speaking, hadith is generally divided into these two categories, al-isnad and al-matn. And when we take the matn as well, we would see that it contains names of individuals, and then there is these things that connect the names. So we see Imam al-Bukhari, for example, he says حدثنا يحيى بن بكير, so he says حدثنا يحيى بن بكير عن عقيل حدثنا يحيى بن بكير عن عقيل عن ابن شهاب. اوكي, حدثنا يحيى بن بكير حدثنا الليث عن عقيل عن ابن عن الزهري, okay, عن ابن شهاب الزهري. So you see that Imam al-Bukhari is also saying حدثنا يحيى بن بكير حدثنا الليث and Lays, and then from al-Lays it says عن عقيل عن ابن شهاب أن Abdullah ibn Umar akhbarahu anna Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam qal. So in between the names we have haddathana twice, we have an twice, and we have anna also twice. Now these terms that connect the names, they are referred to as adawatu tahammul. They are these ways that show how the hadith was received. So for example, he could also have said sami'tu, which means I heard my teacher reading. Okay, so this would be al-ard, the teacher. This would be sama', the teacher read it onto me. And then there is, for example, qara'atu ala shaykh, I read onto the shaykh. Okay, and there is sami'tu mimma quri'a ala shaykh, I heard from what was read onto the shaykh. Okay, and there is haddathana, the teacher told us, or akhbarana, the teacher informed us. And then there is an, and there's anna. So what the author here is saying, mu'an'anun ka'an sa'idin an karam. He's saying that a hadith is said to be mu'an'an when the adawatu tahammul are mostly an fulan, an fulan, an fulan, fulan, an fulan, an fulan, when it is the most case, or it is the majority. Okay, like we have in this chain, Imam al-Bukhari, he says, hadith number 2442, حدثنا يحيى بن بكير حدثنا الليث عن عقيل عن ابن شهاب, at least two. And the other case is حدثنا also twice, and Anna fulan akhbarahu, also twice. So this is a really great chain to demonstrate some of these features, and in particular al-hadith al-mu'an'an. So when a hadith has an ana, then we said it is mu'an'an. And it's important in the sense that when a narrator is found to do tadlis, in other words, he says, he narrates hadith from teachers is not met. He narrates a hadith from teachers is not met. Then he does an ana. We need to investigate it further to be really sure that he met the teacher. And often the muhaddithun, they discuss an ana in relation to an'anatul mudallis, and whether al-aslu ma huwa al-aslu fil an'ana. When a hadith contains an fulan, do we take it to mean that those individuals, they have heard and studied from each other or not? And there's a difference of opinion among the scholars, and the details of the discussion is beyond the scope of this lesson. So I'm just pointing to it so that you can follow it further and read on it, inshallah. And he says, وَمُبْهَمٌ مَا فِيهِ رَاوٍ لَمْ يُسَمْ. A hadith is said to be mubham when there is a narrator in it who is not named. وَمُبْهَمٌ مَا فِيهِ رَاوٍ لَمْ يُسَمْ. When there is a narrator in the chain who is not named, we say the hadith is mu'an'an. Okay, مَا فِيهِ مَنْ لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُهُ سَوَاءٌ كَانَ فِي الْإِسْنَادِ أَوْ فِي الْمَتْنِ. And this individually could be in the isnad itself, or it could be in the matn itself. Once again, there's a very interesting hadith in Sahih Bukhari where Talha bin Ubaidillah says, جاء رجل إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أهل نجد ثائر الرأس يسمع دوي صوته ولا يفقه ما يقول. So Talha bin Ubaidullah, he said, this person, he came, he says, Ja'a rajulun, a person came to Rasulullah. So this is mubham in the matn. Okay, the person who is not named is found in the matn. Ja'a rajulun ila Rasulullah. And as a fa'idah, any time you hear Ja'a rajulun, okay, then the hadith is mubham. Similarly, if you read in a chain where it says an rajulin or an shaykhin is not any person's name. When you say akhbarani thiqa, even is mubham. Similarly, akhbarani fulanun wa ghayruhu, this is also a chain that is said to be mubham because there's a narrator in it who is not named. Wa mubhamun ma fihi rawin lam yusam. So when there's a narrator who is not named, then the hadith is said to be mubham. And then he goes on to discuss al-hadith al-ali. Now, al-hadith al-ali, like I said in the beginning of the lesson, is a latifa isnadiyya. In other words, it is something that beautifies the chain. It's something that beautifies the chains. He says, وَكُلُّ مَا قَلَّتْ رِجَالُهُ عَلَى وَضِدُّهُ ذَاكَ الَّذِي قَدْ نَزَلَ. Any hadith, the narrators of which are found to be less, then it is ala, it rises. Okay, it becomes al-hadith al-ali. So the less the number of narrators in the overall chain, the more valuable the hadith is likely to be, because the idea of chains of narrators is that we are transmitting information from a particular source, and the closer that we are to the source, the more original the information is likely to be. So the more distant you become from the original, from the source, then the more likely the information is to corrupt. In fact, it's something that even exists in engineering or in communication. And over time, though, we've improved it. But back in the days, the lengthier the distance you are trying to cover, the more corrupt that the bandwidth, the data, the packets that you are transmitting is likely to be. And over time, of course, it has improved, and we have the internet today, and we communicate in near real time. So, but then there used to be that issue where when information takes longer to get to the destination, it gets corrupted. So similarly, over here as well, when we are closest to the source of the information, then the hadith is said to be more likely to be accurate. So we say it has ulu, okay, ulu, safa, something of the kind. So when there are just three narrators like Malik and Nafi and Ibn Umar and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then this hadith is said to be Ali, because there are less narrators, as opposed to say we come to Imam al-Bukhari who goes through Abdullah bin Yusuf and Malik and like that. But then to compare two ahadith and tell whether one is Ali or Nazil, to compare two ahadith and tell if one is Ali or Nazil, we need to look at the books or the individuals we are considering here should be in the same level. So we take Imam al-Tirmizi and Imam al-Bukhari. So Imam al-Tirmizi was a student of Imam al-Bukhari. So if Imam al-Tirmizi narrates a hadith with the same number of narrators as Imam al-Bukhari, Imam al-Tirmizi's hadith would be relatively ali in comparison to Imam al-Bukhari, because Imam al-Tirmizi is generally supposed to narrate one level below al-Bukhari because he was on the level of the teachers of al-Bukhari. So if for some reason he's able to narrate directly from any teacher from the levels, or from a direct teacher of Imam al-Bukhari, or any teacher for that matter from the level of Imam al-Bukhari, then we said the hadith is somewhat has ulu. We say the hadith has ulu. Then he says وَضِدُّهُ ذَاكَ الَّذِي قَدْ نَزَلَ. The opposite of al-hadith al-ali, the opposite of al-hadith al-ali is al-lazi nazala, is a hadith that has come down a level. Like the example I was trying to give, if Imam al-Bukhari, if Imam al-Tirmizi is able to narrate with the same level as Imam al-Bukhari, then we say his hadith is ali. But then the more narrators there are in the chain, then we say the less, the more the nuzul. And ulu sanad is something that the scholars they used to see, because it among other things also proves that you sought knowledge early. Because for Imam al-Tirmizi to have met the teachers of Imam al-Bukhari and to have studied from it, means he has to have started studying very early, and he had to have traveled. Okay, and from this perspective, ulu is something that the scholars they really praise and they loved so much so that Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in, when he was on his sick bed, the sickness from which he never woke, and they asked him, "Maza tashtahi? What do you desire right now?" He said, "Isnadun alin wa baytun khalin." It's not that it's ali and then a house that is empty. It's not ali because it has that virtue that scholars of hadith they generally seek, and a baytun khalin liyashtaghila fihi bil ibadah, so that he could engage with worship and so on and so forth. And similarly, nuzul, when you read books of Jarh wa Ta'dil, it has this special and interesting feature around it also that is good to know, which is that when they are mentioning the teachers of a narrator, okay, so if they mention Imam al-Bukhari, he studied from fulan and fulan and fulan, and they say وَيَنْزِلُ فَيَرْوِي عَنْ فُلَانٍ وَيَنْزِلُ إِلَى دَرَجَةِ فُلَانٍ يَنْزِلُ إِلَى دَرَجَةِ فُلَانٍ. He comes down to the level of so and so. So when a teacher narrates from his student, it's a virtue for him, so we say يَنْزِلُ إِلى دَرَجَةِ فُلَانٍ. Okay, he's too virtuous to record from this person who is below his level, but he will still come down to record. And this is something that generally these scholars don't do. So if anyone does it, then it shows his nobility, it shows his virtue, and it shows his sincerity as well, that he doesn't mind to narrate and study from students of his, or from people on the level of his student. Imam Malik used to do this a lot, and inshallah in our next lesson we will be looking at al-hadith al-mawquf. Subhanakallah bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.